Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Martina Tanga, and on behalf of my colleagues in the Art of the Americas and Contemporary Art departments, we thank you for joining us for this program, Planting Together, a conversation with Ekua Holmes and Elizabeth James Perry in connection with the Garden for Boston outdoor installation, which officially opens today on this rainy afternoon. Ekua and Elizabeth have reshaped the grounds at the Huntington entrance to the Museum of Fine Arts with sunflowers and corn, ephemeral plants that are nonetheless part of the endless cycles of nature and long histories of New England land. Elizabeth's installation, Raven Reshapes Boston, a native corn garden at the MFA, draws on planting techniques used by local indigenous people for thousands of years, centering the reciprocal relationships between humans and the land. Ekua has planted some 3,000 sunflowers for Radiant Community, an extension of her ongoing Roxbury Sunflower Project, which uses sunflowers to spread beauty and hope throughout the historically Black Boston neighborhood. Together, these nurturing summer gardens represent resilience, strength, and hope of both these artists, their community, and their ancestors. Some quick housekeeping before we get started. This program is being recorded and will be made available later this summer. Only our panelists are visible and audible throughout this event. Your video and audio is disabled, but we hope we will hear from you comments and questions through the chat and Q&A function. And lastly, a transcript and closed captions for this program are available through the Rev for Zoom live captions. We thank our colleagues Nadia Harden and Sophia Walter for their logistical support, and Sophia is providing technical assistance for today's program via the chat function. And it's my pleasure to hand it over to my colleague Tess Lukey, who will offer this land acknowledgement.
Waniwanok, Atasuis Tess Lukey, Nutpomas Aquinnah. Hello, good evening. My name is Tess Lukey. I am Aquinnah Wampanoag and the Curatorial Research Associate in the Art of the Americas department. Although we are in a virtual space, I would like to acknowledge that the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, founded in 1870, stands on a site which has long served as a place of meeting and exchange among different nations across New England. I am honored to say that I am currently presenting this from my ancestral homeland. Many things come to mind when you say, I am a New Englander. For me, that means not only have I lived in New England my whole life, but that I come from this land. My ancestors came from this land. Being Indigenous in New England means something different than it does elsewhere in the United States. The lack of Indigenous representation and overt erasure of Native peoples throughout New England is apparent, whether it is in public education or institutions. New England and Massachusetts specifically is Indigenous, and it is all around you. Our street names, our town names, our lakes, rivers, ocean, all of those familiar sounds come from the Algonquian peoples that have called this land home since time immemorial. As a museum, we are actively working on better ways to acknowledge the long history of the land we occupy today and seek ways to make Indigenous narratives more prominent in our galleries and programming. Kathapatash, Kathabatanamu, thank you. Thank you all. Reto and Ethan will now give some remarks about the project as a whole.
Thank you, Martina, for your introduction, and thank you, Tess, for the land acknowledgement and your remarks. And hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to see so many interested in what is happening at and in front of the MFA. And my deepest thanks, first and foremost, go out to Elizabeth James Perry and Ekua Holmes, two brilliant artists whose voices are critical to be heard, as well as the many collaborators and supporters of theirs. It means a lot to us to realize this project together with all of you. You make us a stronger, better institution. My name is Reto Thüring, and I am the Beal Family Chair of Contemporary Art. Together with my colleague Ethan Lasser from the Art of the Americas, I will speak for a few minutes about the context within which a garden for Boston is situated. Museums are going through a phase of profound change. Many of these changes are necessary, many are overdue, and they touch almost every area of our work. However, by literally looking at the museum, little signaled any of that thinking and doing until recently. And I think the juxtaposition between the postcard and the recent picture of the MFA's facade illustrates that pretty well. By approaching the MFA, the institution for the longest time presented itself as a stark architectural and experiential proposition, mostly stuck in historicizing tropes. However, I think of our campus as the palpable connecting tissue between the MFA and the communities that surround us, and a powerful tool to soften our boundaries. I could therefore not be happier how A Garden for Boston and the two projects by Ekua Holmes and Elizabeth James Perry enable us to rethink how we present ourselves from the outside, transforming the lawn into a growing, blooming, compelling message about resilience, hope, and our commitment to center the voices of living artists. And now over to my colleague, Ethan Lasser. Thank you.
Thank you, Reto, and welcome everyone. I'll add a brief word of thanks and word of welcome as chair of the Art of the Americas Department. And last June, if we can, thank you, Reto and I organized this virtual convening that you're seeing on the screen through the MFA's Table of Voices program to discuss with a small group of artists the museum's campus and the equestrian sculpture that has stood at our Huntington entrance since 1912, Cyrus Dallon's Appeal to the Great Spirit. And I feel so fortunate that the two artists you'll meet tonight at Wright, Ekua Holmes and Elizabeth James Perry, attended that forum because it was on the screen just a year ago that this project was born. In the midst of our discussion about the facade and our debates about how to best reckon with the Dallon, in the midst of the ongoing national conversation around monuments and meeting, Ekua discussed the Roxbury Sunflower Project, and Elizabeth raised her hand to ask, memorably ask, what about enveloping the Dallon in a field of corn? And these ideas, which you'll hear more about, were just too bold and too powerful not to try and see through in some way. If we can go ahead. Here, a year later, it is my privilege to acknowledge all of the MFA colleagues, the colleagues from across the museum who contributed to this project and helped to see these gardens through, about which you'll hear more about. It truly takes a village. And I want to offer particular thanks to project manager Mary Nelson, who has been so committed to seeing Ekua and Elizabeth's ideas through and has navigated every bump in the road of this sometimes difficult project. If we can go ahead. Here you'll see both gardens. I also want to thank our partners across Boston because the whole city contributed to this project. Zana Porter and Green City Growers, London Parker McWhorter and the United Neighborhoods of Lower Roxbury, David Hurst and Hurst Landscaping and Site Services, Beyond Measure Productions, Mary McNeil, our consultant for programming. And finally, we'd like to acknowledge our generous funders. Garden for Boston is supported by the Carl and Ruth Shapiro Family Foundation with additional support from an anonymous donor. Funding for this program and others is provided by the MFA Associates and the MFA Senior Associates, and we thank them all. And I will now turn it over to Marina for introductions.
Okay, have a day, everyone. I hope that you can, Have a day, everyone. Thank you, Martina, Tess, Reto, and Ethan. I am joining you from the museum itself, and I am so excited for everyone to see and experience these gardens, preferably not in the rain, at a later date. This event is the kickoff for the gardens, our official public opening, so we're so happy that you're here today. And I am so honored to introduce our guest speakers tonight, who are the artists of Garden for Boston. Next slide, please. Elizabeth James Perry is an artist, activist, naturalist, and marine biologist. She is an enrolled member of the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquinnah, whose homelands include the richly colored clay cliffs of Martha's Vineyard, also called Noep. As a member of a nation that has lived on and harvested the sea since ancient times, Elizabeth's perspective combines coastal Algonquin culture, traditional beliefs, and science in her ways of relating to the North Atlantic. Much of Elizabeth's work focuses on early Northeastern woodlands native culture, including ancient wampum shell carving and reviving natural dye techniques to create a traditional palette for finger-woven sashes, such as this wampum belt, as well as bags and baskets. She has created museum-quality textiles, arts in milkweed and cedar bast, intricately painted deerskin, and to capture the classic layered drape of native linen trade cloth outfits. Elizabeth represents Wampanoag traditions by writing and exhibit design, and occasionally through intensive community weaving and dye workshops for organizations like the Evergreen College Longhouse. Her work was featured in Native Peoples Magazine in 2011, in Cultural Survival Magazine, and she has penned an article for Dawnland Voices 2.0. Welcome, Elizabeth. Next slide, please. Ekua Holmes is an artist and activist, born, raised, and still living in Roxbury. She works in many mediums, and her collage-based work made from cut and torn papers investigates family histories, relationship dynamics, childhood impressions, and the power of hope, faith, and self-determination. She considers herself part of a long line of Roxbury image makers. In her first public art initiative, she received a Now Plus There Public Art Accelerator Foundation and launched the Roxbury Sunflower Project, now in its 4th year, in which she facilitated the planting of 10,000 sunflower seeds in her native Roxbury. Holmes currently serves as Commissioner and Vice Chair of the Boston Arts Commission, which oversees the placement and maintenance of public works of art on and in the City of Boston properties. She is currently also the Associate Director at the Center for Art and Community Partnerships at Mass Art, where she oversees Art Mobile, a vehicle retrofitted to contribute to community-based multidisciplinary arts programming, currently focused on the Mission Hill, Roxbury, and Dorchester neighborhoods. An exhibition of her collage work, Paper Stories, Layered Dreams, The Art of Ekua Holmes, opens at the MFA on July 17th, so please come and see it. And now over to my colleagues, Tess and Martina, to begin our conversation with Ekua and Elizabeth. Thank you all for being here again.
We are so excited to hear from you about your projects. Could you briefly tell us about them yourselves and how you came to create them? And I'm going to have Elizabeth go first.
Ciao, Anikisak. It's good to be speaking to everybody this evening, and really nice to see the gardens both completed, and exciting to watch them grow and develop and change over time. I think it's amazing. So, you know, I think it was really interesting to be able to bring traditional arts from a Wampanoag perspective to the Boston area, which is not, as Tess was saying, a place with much that reflects Northeastern Native identity or values or traditions. There's been a lot of erasure, unfortunately. And so I like to center the work of women in what I do. And women are really, in our society, considered life givers, the creative ones, the nurturing ones. And gardening is often companion planting. So there's corn, there's also beans growing, there's beautiful sedges. They all have their applications in our art forms in terms of weaving. You can dye the materials, you can weave with the materials and create beautiful, strong textured things. And I also grow a lot of my own dyes on my property, as well as wild harvesting materials to use in my weaving. Harvesting the shells, not only to use as the border for the garden, there's quite a lot there actually, but I also use the shells in a lot of my wampum design work for adornment, as well as for, you know, larger historical focused pieces as well.
And if we go to the next slide, the corn has a shape which you might not be able to tell from down below, but would you talk about the shape of the piece and the positioning of the Dallin? Yes.
So it was my answer to what is a monument that's very much focused on a depiction, I guess I would say, of Western Native identity and experience. And yeah, this is Wampanoag and Nipmuc and Mohican and Massachusetts homeland. And I didn't want that to get lost. And so being an island person, being of the Aquinnah tribe, I wanted to use a horseshoe crab shape. So I kind of made it a little bit more flowy and organic, but that's the overall pattern. I wanted it to have things that resonated with our traditional gardening and our traditional sustenance on the ocean. And hence there's a shell border of the quahog shell around the sea creature, around the horseshoe crab. And it also is raised in profile. So it's not a flat garden, but it kind of mounds up like our traditional mound gardens. I like that there's a three-dimensionality about it. I like that there's some relief, and I think it is a way of changing the energy of a space when you do that as well. So it harkens back to some of our traditional gardening, but also our traditional earthworks and ceremonial sites and all.
Great, thanks so much. If we can have the next slide, Ekua, will you tell us about your project and how you came to doing this at the MFA, its meaning, and then we also have a slide of its plan from aerial plan, so also its shape.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the great introduction. I would say that the Roxbury Sunflower Project has been a dream that's been in my heart and mind for quite a long time. And the inspiration for it came from several sources. One being doing a biography, illustrating a biography about Fannie Lou Hamer, who was born in Sunflower County, Mississippi, and thinking about the juxtaposition of a sharecropper's life and the divinity of sunflowers being in proximity. The second source was Alice Walker's book, In Search of Our Mother's Garden, where she poses the question about what happens to the creativity, the creative force in women who are marginalized, oppressed, suppressed. Does it go away? No, it doesn't. But in profiling her mom, she talked about her mother's garden being this incredible source that not only enlivened her and her siblings' lives, but the life of the community through planting. I was fortunate to receive the Now and There Accelerator grant, which got this project off the ground. And I think it's important to say that we give away 10,000 sunflower seeds in the community because this is a community-wide gesture. It isn't just me planting or just the MFA planting. We have plantings all over the Roxbury community and beyond. We've even had people chime in from Ohio and say, I want to plant sunflower seeds too. And I feel like they can plant in solidarity to this project. Originally, the Sunflower Project was an effort to position the sunflower as an emblem for the Roxbury community, because as I studied this sunflower, I found so many attributes that I thought really spoke to the community that I had grown up in, the community that had nurtured me. So there are 7 themes in the project that speak to these attributes, and they are obviously the multiplicity of seeds that exist in a sunflower's head that can feed the birds and the squirrels through the winter season. To plant a seed is to believe in the future. We don't plant a seed and think that nothing's going to happen from it. And that's true not just with sunflower seeds, but with everything that we do. Whether planting seeds of love, knowledge, seeds of hope, seeds of wisdom. And I like to add seeds of self-determination, because I think that's so important in our communities that I love hope, but I want something a little bit more dynamic, like self-determining just who we are and who we want to be. I'm the result of seeds planted by the generation that came before me. So the question is, what seeds are you planting for tomorrow? Second theme is deep roots. Being deeply rooted in your community means that you will go to great lengths for its survival and thriving. And the sunflower does that by sending down a deep tap root into the ground to find nurturing, even if it seems dry on the surface. And I've seen that in my community, creatively tapping into resources that were not obvious, supporting one another with, sometimes meager resources. Despite those struggles, I am planted in Roxbury, and I plan to hold fast, and I strive to be part of the resources that other roots can take strength from. The third theme is heliotropism, which the sunflower is known to be one of those flowers. It's not the only one that tracks the sun in its adolescent stage. It faces east in the morning. It tracks the sun all day. and faces west as the sun goes down and then resets in the morning. So it is always drawing the most light to itself that it possibly can. And so, you know, how do we follow the light in our lives? Who are the people that shine light upon us that we can then, for the next attribute, radiance, that we can take and radiate back into our communities to blossom and inspire others? One of Fannie Lou Hamer, her famous song was "This Little Light of Mine, I'm Gonna Let It Shine." And I think it's important that no matter how small that light is, you know, there are some people who think, what do I have to offer? But even if it's a smile or planting one sunflower seed, you can still change the atmosphere and inspire others. So who shines light into your life? Next is resilience, another quality that shines really brightly in Roxbury. Growing up there, I observed the adults striving to make opportunities available for the next generation, greater opportunities than they had, fighting against political isolation, discrimination, and they worked year after year, opening doors for people like me. Like the sunflower, they were resistant to being cut down and they withstood many challenges. The Black women of Roxbury, Elizabeth and I talked about the women of our communities. The Black women of Roxbury were known advocates for their children's educational opportunities, birthing programs like Metco, starting schools like Page Academy and the Elmer Lewis School of Fine Arts. They believed in their rights to full citizenship, developing properties like the Tenants Development Corporation as they sat around their kitchen tables, and they bounced back from every hardship and kept fighting. So where are the monuments to their work? And how can flowers be a part of that? And the last two are transformation and beauty. In addition to their outstanding visual presence, sunflowers can transform the very soil that they're planted in. I found out in year 2 that the sunflower is the symbol for nuclear disarmament, because from a scientific standpoint, if you plant a field of sunflowers in soil that is damaged by radiation, the sunflowers will draw those toxins out and return that soil to usability. I remember when in the 1960s, Roxbury was overrun with the dumping of toxic waste in abandoned lots from people who lived outside of the community, but knew that the city would not necessarily support us fighting against them. And those toxins remained in so many areas so that raised beds became a thing, so you could plant food that you could actually eat. So sunflowers are hyper accumulators and bioremediators, but who are the sunflowers in our lives who are transforming the world right now? And then finally, beauty. Theaster Gates, one of my favorite thinkers, says that beauty is a basic service. And I know that many artists are involved in bringing beauty into the space. With these two projects in partnership with nature, we welcome back endangered pollinators back into the community. And the invitation begins in our own front yards, including the MFA's front yard, and to look upon the fruit of the sun.
Thank you, that was beautiful.
Wonderful points. I really loved listening to you and Elizabeth talk about your gardens. And I've been spending a lot of time out there with the plants and kind of, I don't know, communing with the beautiful gardens and really reacquainting myself with the land that I'm on when I'm at the MFA. And I'm struck by how many points of intersection there are between your two projects, especially in their connection to women and the importance of sustainable planting. I was wondering if there are any other points of intersection in which you see your projects relating to one another.
I don't know if Elizabeth, do you want to grab that, and I'll add to whatever you have to say.
Certainly, sure. Well, there's a lot of intersections actually. So, you know, gardens sustain both of our communities. It's a strong part of both of our community identity. And up until a couple of generations ago, you know, in Aquinnah, we all raised our own food and went fishing and shell fishing, and that was it. There was no grocery store, so that was life. And there's something really important about self-reliance, having that discipline, but also doing it in a certain way that's sustainable, that keeps you tied to the seasons, that keeps you mindful of the abundance, or, you know, maybe a short season, and, you know, how to support the natural world and keep it green and growing so that the next generations can have at least as much as we have, if not much more, hopefully. So there is that essence of hope but it's a very careful, very observant kind of hope and planning for the future. There's intersections, I think, as well in terms of self-determination and resilience and continuation and surviving adversity with grace, coming through difficulties. You know, in the Northeast, for Native people here, there's so many challenges. There's displacement, there's been wars, of course, there was slavery, economic warfare, you know, for lack of a better term, educational challenges at times, whatever you can think of. Basically, we've been through it, and we've seen our homeland suffer environmentally as well in ways that continue to be really devastating to us as a group and personally. And so I think to continue with our traditions, to work on our language, to share our arts, to buoy each other up and sustain each other with the beautiful things that we can create, to show the creator that we continue to value our homelands, and work for the good of the lands and the good of everybody else here. I think it's amazing to be able to do that in a very visible way here at the MFA. And that's been really important, and it's been really wonderful, I think, working with the team at the MFA. I want to say that too.
Just to add to that, there's a historic underpinning to the work that we're doing. When we talk about, you know, the land being the land of the Massachusetts people, but also the fact that the MFA is in Roxbury, what used to be Roxbury, that entire area. But there was a time when no institution wanted to have its address be 02119. And so I feel like in some ways, planting on the lawn of the MFA is re-embracing all of Roxbury, all of its history, going back through time. And also another overlapping theme, I think, is Elizabeth's project and mine, our community-wide gestures and demonstrations. Elizabeth didn't plant all of that corn herself. She brought in a community to be in the soil with her, to you know, call upon the ancestors with her. And I don't know if you pray over the soil or sing over the soil or dance over the soil, but everybody has their own strategies. And that's really important for me with the Roxbury Sunflower Project, because I could be gone tomorrow, but I'm hoping that people will still look at sunflowers in a particularly different way because of the project. Both of our projects acknowledge our ancestors whose shoulders we're standing on, whether it's through the techniques that Elizabeth is using to plant, or in my case, acknowledging women like Elma Lewis, who planted seeds in a different way, but had just as much impact as I'm hoping to have with sunflowers. Acknowledging women's work and investment in our communities, which is long overdue, and the reclamation of land, truth, and history. Can I add one more thing? When you mentioned warfare, I was thinking about educational warfare, because I don't know about the Indigenous histories in Massachusetts. I've lived here my entire life. And through my conversations with Elizabeth, she might say a name, like you said a name in one of our conversations, Smalley.
Oh, yeah.
Now I have a friend whose last name is Smalley, and he happened to call me the other day. I said, "Are you Wampanoag?" He says, "Yeah, you don't know that part about me." And he started telling me about his history. In my community, in the Roxbury community, there have been Smalleys and Peters and all of these people, and they've been there the whole time, but the education has been hidden from us. And so it's a kind of educational warfare too that keeps us from knowing about each other in a deep way. So I'm really, really grateful for this interaction that we're having.
That's wonderful to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think working with both of you, it's been clear how much you've learned from each other, and how much you've like sparked a really sincere and honest and beautiful connection with each other's work. So it's been a privilege to see that unfold. I have a question about the specific materials of our conversation today, the plants. So Elizabeth, you have 3 different plants in your garden, and you've touched a bit about this already. In Ekua, you have 9 varieties of sunflowers. Can you talk a little bit more about, and I think we've kind of touched on this, but a little bit more in depth about the real significance of these materials, and what is it like as an artist to work with materials that are living and growing and changing, as opposed to more kind of static traditional material, to even have nature as a partner in your work. So if you could open up the question to talking about that too.
I like working with plants specifically a lot because there's a lot you can do with them, and those come from really, really long traditions in this region for Native art. They're the underpinnings, so knowing the land, knowing the resources, knowing when and how to gather. Corn is really wonderful to work with because it's good for textiles. Actually, it's very strong, and it's got a very it makes a certain sound even when you're working with it, and you have to soak it because it's quite dry and crunchy and a little bit more brittle when it's dry. But then when you soak it, it becomes magically flexible, easy to split to whatever thickness you want. But more so than that, as a dye artist, I love that corn husk actually takes a dye beautifully. So you can achieve a nice range of really beautiful, natural, non-toxic, local, sustainable colors, and then weave your art. And it's very, very rugged and very durable. So I'm honestly I'm very tactile, and honestly, I like it when people use the pieces that I make. You can, of course, preserve them and put them behind glass. That works too. But I really like it when people just like enjoy it and use it, get some use out of pieces, because you can carry them with you. It's really important to do that. Sometimes it's really sustaining to be able to do that and to share that. I use a lot of milkweed. I actually harvest the fibers from the stem of the plant. They're very, very soft. It makes a beautiful textile. And I hand spin. It's a bit time consuming, but I hand spin on my lathe, like a 2-ply or a single ply, depending on what I'm doing. And again, it's a material like hemp or like cotton that takes nice dye colors from plants and minerals. And there's other kinds of dyes as well, roots, nuts, nut husks, black walnut, and good stuff like that. Sunflower petals. We could use some of Ekua's flowers for that if the opportunity arose. So yeah, the opportunities are endless to be really creative, and then combining it with the shell is just a natural for me, being a coastal person. So.
Ekua, before you answer, Elizabeth, you told me a wonderful story about the choice of corn that you used, the Abenaki corn, and I was wondering if you might share a little bit about that.
Sure, it's the Kalai corn, if I'm saying it right. I'm not a French speaker, so sorry. But my friend Judy Dow, who is Abenaki, she actually in her youth was helping a set of elderly brothers who had a really, really old house in northern Vermont to rebuild their house. They didn't have the finances to just, pay for it to be reconstructed. So community members volunteered. And within the wall of the house, instead of having like modern insulation or something like that, or even wood, I've seen wood slats in like 18th century houses. It's an odd form of insulation, but I've seen it. There were corn cobs, dried corn cobs that were very, very old. And she found that there were still kernels adhering. And further, when they continued to work on the house, they found some full jars of the corn downstairs that were sealed up nicely too. And so she and others grew it out. And once they had kind of recovered the seed and worked with some farmers, they actually turned the seeds over to Fedco. And that means that, folks like me can just buy a pound of Abenaki corn. I really liked that story. When she gifted it to me, she explained that. And so then I thought, I know what kind of corn I want to grow. And I was asking around, and I actually did find a second site to grow some additional rows of the corn as well. So if there's any mishaps, we'll have some backup.
Well, you asked the question, I think, about the flowers. I think there are actually maybe six or seven varieties there. And part of it is just to share the diversity of this one flower, which can be lemon yellow, golden yellow, red, variegated. There's so many different varieties, just like there are amongst us as citizens. I like to think of the sunflower as the most human-like flower that there is. It has a big head. It's can stand up on its own, and at maturity, its leaves hang down like arms, and it's like a sentinel. So I love working with it for that reason. This year, for the MFA installation, we are complementing that with touches of fragrance with Tulsi, and also color with the pincushion flowers, because yellow and purple are complements on the color wheel. So we thought that that might be exciting. And then one of the materials that we haven't spoken of are the cobblestones that are outlining the different plantings. Well, first of all, we wanted the planting to be accessible to the public. So we wanted people to be able to walk through the planting. And fortunately, the MFA was able to put in the accessibility ramps for strollers and wheelchairs so that people can go right up into the sunflower planting. But those cobblestones, the one garden that I knew intimately was planted by my aunt in our backyard when I was growing up. And a lot of Boston streets were made of cobblestones, and then they came with the asphalt and covered them over. Well, on some of the side streets off of my street, that asphalt was coming up, and my aunt would go down and she would bring up 2 cobblestones per trip. And she used that to create a stepped garden in our backyard. And so we looked at other kinds of stones, and I remembered her doing that. And I said, I want to use cobblestones because that has meaning for me as a child. I would watch her planting and see her beautiful garden. She never let me do anything with her, but it was beautiful. And I remember so well her carrying those stones up and all of the labor that went into that. So I think that's a very special addition to this particular planting this year.
Thank you both. I think Tess has the next question.
Can you all hear me okay? I want to make sure that my sound is doing better than it was. Okay. I am absolutely floored by the amount of intricacy that there is to your works, both of your gardens. I've learned so much from both of you, and it comes to mind, I start thinking about what it means to be creating this work at the MFA and in Boston, a place, Elizabeth, that you have kinship ties to, the same for you, Ekua. And what does it mean to be doing this installation at this moment in time? I mean, there's so much going on, and inherently these have to be tied in some ways, at least I would think, to some of the things that are going on politically, socially in our world in a time of COVID even.
Well, I could just mention, as a member of the Boston Art Commission, we are looking at memorials and public art installations in new ways. And we're inviting the citizens of the city of Boston to have these conversations with us. And part of that is acknowledging these hidden histories, erased histories that have not been acknowledged on a street level, where a lot of learning takes place on the street when it isn't in the classroom. So what kind of imagery do we really want to support? One of the things that I think about with the Sunflower Project is how can gardens and flowers be memorials, and how important might it be to have a memorial that you have to replant every year, you have to recommit to every year, versus something in bronze or stone that once you put it up, people are loath to take it down, even if it no longer represents the values of the community. When I look at Elizabeth's project and this sort of interruption of a piece that's been problematic, I think about it as a potential, a potential way to address some of these issues. But I definitely see the MFA offering up its front lawn as a part of that conversation.
I think it's been really, really good to be able to undertake this project in Boston. I think for me, there's a symbology of the corn that it's very much about the cycle of life. It's about rebirth after loss and regeneration, and our celebrations and ceremonies, speak to that and appreciate that, make us really mindful of that, I think. So it's a way of marking those values. I like that it's our work and our values continued, so I'd like to think to the future when my descendants can look back and say, oh, look at this amazing project that happened. People still cared. They were thinking about us. So we'll have something in the future. So it starts to allow, I think, for me, Native people, different Native artists, speakers, presenters, musicians, in various ways, and African-American artists and speakers and presenters to begin to leave a more tangible legacy. I think then we were able to, before I think there was, well, I think people have worked really, generations have worked really hard before me. I didn't invent this. But I think sometimes there's a moment in time when things begin to really land, when people seem primed to hear something new, where conversations can be sparked more easily. And this feels like one of those moments. And part of it is born of need from great tragedies that have happened in the past year or more now, and including the pandemic, but there's a lot that's happened, that's transpired. Part of my motivation for planting corn in Boston in the first place actually came, from about a decade ago or so, when the Cartier case was, going through the courts, and then the resulting act, which called into question Native people's ability to take land into trust and take care of our communities. And it was really deeply affecting. And so the idea of creating visibility for Native people in a very city, urban, place seemed not just interesting or creative or thought-provoking, but I felt like it was crucial to our actual survival as a nation. And so that vision was actually born then, and it's been really excellent to be able to see it through.
Great. So I'm back again from the introduction there to kind of ask the final question that we've kind of pre-prepared before we get to really fabulous audience questions from everyone. And I just want to say again, a huge thank you to Ekua and Elizabeth for thinking with us, for sitting with us, for these really beautiful responses. And Elizabeth just said something that I think led the way really beautifully into the next question, which is the idea of leaving behind something tangible. And I know Ekua has spoken about this, and you just said again, this idea of sunflowers being monuments. And I love the kind of deep historical ties of both of your works, histories that people don't often know about, really important histories to you and to your communities, what I would say are American histories that should be important to everyone. And so I wonder if you could each speak about how this project bridges on the other artworks that you create and their relationship to community building and tradition, and this really active way that you're kind of showing history and making, new monuments, new kinds of monuments for your communities. And I wonder if maybe Ekua, you could start us off.
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I wanted to just add in that, Elizabeth, you mentioned some of the tragedies that, seem to have cracked something open for moments like this. And it was very heartening in a way to see that the George Floyd Memorial, he was in front of a sunflower, and each life that had been cut down was represented as a seed. And I think that's a really important metaphor for us caring for the next generation, that, each of them are seeds that need to be cared for and nurtured in the same way that we're caring for and nurturing the plants that we're putting in the ground. I feel like my personal work has always been about these themes, about joy, about childhood, about values and relationships. And like many artists that I admire, there comes a point where you want to move into the public space because you realize that there are folks that are not coming into the museum or not going into the galleries, and you want to speak to them, you want to talk to them, you want to be in conversation with them. So doing things in a public space allows you to have an impact, to change the atmosphere in very positive ways. I feel these two projects, for instance, I feel partnering with nature is also another element that I think these two projects have that we should be thinking about more, working in concert with nature, as opposed to putting concrete over the ground, letting the ground be a part of our celebrations and our commemorations. So I think that is the connection for me. It's still about joy. As a matter of fact, sunflowers represent the joy spectrum of the color wheel. Yellow, orange, green, that's the joy spectrum. And to be able to put that in places that are uncared for, we're doing a lot on Blue Hill Avenue this year. And I just can imagine children skipping along and all of a sudden there are 6-foot sunflowers over them. How can that not make them smile? How can that not make them feel that somebody put that there for them? So I think there's a direct connection.
And Elizabeth, did you want to speak about how this ties to your other work? Or we can move to Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I probably said some of it before, but I think it's a continuation of the work that I've done to shore up resources, help the environment, create awarenesses, revive traditional foodways that are going to keep us healthier than the foods that we buy in grocery stores typically, because they're made for us and by us, right? I think that through practicing art, through practicing gardening, through cooking and other family traditions, those are things that always bring people together for positive reasons. Sure, you can talk politics. I mean, I do all the time. My brother's in tribal council. How could I not? But the point is, you're there together and experiencing, and you're sharing. You're sharing the challenges. And we have a lot that are facing us nowadays in the 21st century. And it's good that we know that, and that we can now come together and find creative solutions. So I think it's not being crushed by adversity, but by being creative and strategic and pooling resources and bringing people together to share ideas and knowledge and perspective and create spaces where people feel like there's equality and where everybody can be heard and where everybody can be seen. I think that's, an important aspect of these gardens as well. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you both so much. And I love the idea of Ekua, and I'm sure Elizabeth, you can imagine this too, of children stumbling upon a field of corn and imagining that it's just for them. Sunflowers, just the same. We also have some signs around just that it's not quite harvest time yet, but I think that those are both such amazing, joyful gardens that can really be loved by anyone. And we have some really fantastic questions from the Q&A, as I mentioned. So I'm going to start with one, and I just want to say to everyone, thank you for your questions. I'm going to maybe sometimes paraphrase them a little bit, just so that we can kind of get the full idea out and get to as many as possible. The first is from Rob Dunlavy, and he references the Maya Lin Vietnam Memorial in Washington, and just the real important kind of complete sense that traditional sculptures can have, and that Garden for Boston and Raven Reshapes Boston and of course Radiant Community can aspire to this kind of productive pluralism. So the idea of kind of seeing everyone together in a space, everyone recognized by this memorial to Vietnam veterans. And he wonders, or they wonder, what the next chapter looks like. And if you have, and I think that we could say it looks like things that are less permanent. But Elizabeth or Ekua, did you have any thoughts to that question?
My only answer would be that what comes next is our decision, is going to come from our conversations and our convenings across the city, if we're speaking about Boston in particular. And the Boston Art Commission is committed to creating a platform for that, so that it isn't just a select group of people that get to decide what is on the streets of Boston, what is representing us as a culture and as a city. So that person, come out to Boston Art Commission meetings and let your voice be heard, write letters, dream, imagine what would be best, in your mind, and then share it with others. And that's how we're going to get to the city that I want to live in.
Elizabeth, did you have anything to add?
I think that all sounded wonderful. I think, yeah, I think that art that comes from our particular various sensibilities that allows creative expression that isn't limited to one specific perspective on what art is or what a monument is just refreshing. And how could it not be engaging, you know, when it's coming from your neighbor or your friend or a new person that you just met? I think it's a wonderful insight. And so I think we'll just be continually having ways to learn and access things that otherwise would be quite hidden.
We also have another question from Sylvia Bottinetti. She says, thanks for this amazing conversation. And she'd like to ask how you plan to use the harvest of these specific gardens this year or perhaps in the future, and how will harvesting and sharing the crops contribute to building community?
Mm-hmm. Well, last year at the Roxbury Sunflower Project, we were in the middle of COVID. And we had a field on Townsend Street of about 600 sunflowers. And so we did a pop-up harvest where people came and cut down their own flowers to take home, to share with a friend, to give as gifts. And it was a wonderful, wonderful gathering. And I'm hoping we're doing the same thing this year at the MFA, while also leaving some sunflowers up for the birds and the animals, because these sunflowers, as they decline, they leave these wonderful seeds that are part of how some species survive over the winter. And those flowers may come up next year. Those seeds may go into the ground and come back up next year. But I'm hoping that we're going to do something very meaningful that may involve performance, may involve prayers and affirmations and those kinds of things at the end of the season as the earth becomes more dormant and life goes underground.
I'm looking forward to harvesting the corn and the beans. And we also use some of the grasses for some of our weavings and basketry as well. The corn leaves and the corn husks are part of that weaving and basketry too. So I can see us using all of those different materials, you know, as little or as much as folks would like, sharing it among Native community members and probably with the broader public as well. So, you know, just looking forward to being there, being present, you know, being present there in the autumn when it's harvest time together and, you know, marking the end of a really, really difficult cycle. I think, you know, for the past more than year, it's been a tough year. And so it's nice to do and to share what's been a major part of our existence here in the Northeast for thousands of years. To be able to do that again, I think is really good. It's healing, I think.
Great. I wanted to plant a seed of a question before we get on to the next, which is that we'd hope to both give you a moment to ask each other any questions that you have. So we're going to keep going with the audience Q&A, but just wanted to have that out because I think the best part of all these programs is when we really get to hear the wonderful people that we bring in who are not from the MFA get to exchange with each other. So just wanted to throw that out there for the next few minutes we have. If you want to just stop and ask each other a question, we welcome that. Martina, did you want to combine the questions?
We have two comments. Susan Collins and Debbie Weiss ask about the longevity of the project. So it's going to be harvested and come to the conclusion, at least for this cycle, this fall, probably around October. And then there is one question that I wanted to flag for you by Doreen McCourt. Thank you for creating your special meaningful gardens at the MFA. Has your work with the MFA on these projects changed your perceptions of the MFA? How did you view the MFA prior to these projects, and how do you view the MFA now?
It's a little bit monumental, I think, to say the MFA, although it is the MFA. So I think I've gotten to know individuals at the MFA in a way that I wouldn't have just coming in for an afternoon to do a quill work demonstration, which I think is what I did in the past a few years ago or something, which was very pleasant. And I, went to a meeting and that was good too. But to be able to work with a group of people over a year, it's been really, really great. I think, corporations, the thing about corporations or institutions, I shouldn't say corporations, they're made up of people. And so this has really given me a chance to not strictly focus on the collection, which is stunning, and which is always a bit complicated for me as a Native person, that there's a lot of, questions that are raised sometimes going into collections. The stories of how they got there is, it's complicated. It's a lot to unpack. But I think, seeing different aspects, looking behind the scenes a little bit, and seeing potential for other projects and a growing relationship is really great. And I also think of some of this work as sort of blazing a trail for other folks as well. I'm also going to admit it's been amazing to work with a Native American curator who's from my community. So I'm calling out Tess. Thank you very much. It's been really wonderful. It's been really special and quite unique for me because I can't get that everywhere. So it's been really great.
And equally as great on my end.
Thank you.
I put something on Facebook today that the two institutions that my mother entrusted my art life to were the Elma Lewis School of Fine Arts and the Museum of Fine Arts, both Roxbury institutions. So as a little girl, I would come here and those stairs on Huntington Avenue would seem like they just went on forever with my little legs, trotting up to get to this Saturday class, which for me was heaven. And to come back now as an artist, as an installation artist at the Museum of Fine Arts is a true 360-degree trip that I've taken. And as Elizabeth said, the MFA is making an effort to open doors. Now, whether they are cracked open, pushed open, wide open, it depends sometimes on the person, but I can see that there are new opportunities and new relationships, as you said. So I have a show that's also opening inside of the museum, and I've been working with the curator for over a year on that and meeting lots of people, going behind the scenes and seeing things that I never thought I would see. So has my opinion changed or my view of the MFA changed? I think the MFA is going through a period of change, and I am witnessing that, and I'm fortunately getting to be a part of that. That's how I would respond to that question.
Thank you, Ekua. We are so happy to have you doing this project with us. And I know that Megan Melvin, who is working with you, that curator, also inside the MFA, we are all just so excited to have you, of course, Elizabeth, to do these fabulous projects with and really change the way that people approach the museum. The gardens are just so much more inviting on the facade. And as of today, we have shelves, as you saw, around Elizabeth's piece.
Beautiful.
It looks so great. So before we have just a few minutes left. And I just wanted to thank everyone for their questions, the ones that we didn't get to as well, and see if the artists wanted to have any final words before we perhaps end right on time, or my colleagues as well.
I wanted to thank the youth curators, the team curators inside of the museum who I've been working with on my exhibition. They are bright stars and they are curating beautiful shows from the MFA's collection. They're not necessarily teens who have decided to have an art life, but they are embracing creativity and critique, and I just am so impressed by them, and they are going to be writing some of the text for my show. That's a great opportunity to me to work with that next generation, hand to hand. So I want to thank them and thank all of you as well for the things that you've put together for Elizabeth and I. And I also want to thank my partners, Lolita Parker Jr. and Parker McWhorter, who are, we're the three legs of the table that is the Roxbury Sunflower Project. And they have done amazing work. So I just want to make sure that they're thanked in this public space.
I think likewise, I'd love to take a moment to thank my community members that were really supportive of this project, and family members, the folks who believed in the idea long before it came to fruition, and who supported in many ways, and who also participated in the planting and growing. So yeah, and I think thanks to all of my ancestors who've done work in the Boston area in various ways, you know, interacting with tribal folks there, but also in colonial times as merchants and as whalers and in the military, and teachers and seamstresses and all of that. So just thinking about Native presence in the past and continuation today.
And I think we should demand that the education system embrace these histories. I don't know how it will happen, but if we don't demand it, if we don't self-determine that, then, you know, 50 years from now, we might be having similar kinds of conversations. So I just want to put that out there.
I agree. I've been doing some writing myself as well. And I've always really, really loved immersing myself in research. And I grew up, I was very lucky to have folks who were into family history, oral traditions, and I was one of those folks who enjoyed listening. But, you know, in speaking with my family too, I understand that it's really important to record those because, you know, things can get lost. And so both for our communities, but also the wider public, I think there needs to be educational and publishing, that's my plug, opportunities for our community members. It's really important. So.
And I want to just thank you both again and plug that we've had other conversations with phenomenal scholars who are Black and Native and represent different communities, know about different histories. So this is third in that series, and those will be available later this summer, which we hope will also be an educational resource. And another thing that I just love about your projects is that they do so much to honor historical people, ancestors, people who are ancestors in thought as well. And I think everyone will see all of the educational materials, interpretive materials outside around the gardens have a lot of those names. And I think they're an invitation to learn more and an invitation to keep the conversation going, to demand, as Ekua suggested, that, or as Ekua stated very forcefully, that these are taught in schools, these are taught at home, and that these conversations are just a start to the learning process. So we are so grateful again. And I just want to thank you all for coming, for being here today, for joining us, for this kind of this thing that felt like community, even though we are so disparate in our location. And I'm very excited for when we can all come together in person. In the coming days, please expect to get an email from Learning an MFA with a copy evaluation of the that we just introduced and resources highlighted today. We appreciate all of your feedback, and I'll also just say for all of us who are on screen, it's a little hard to also do the Q&A in the chat, but Elizabeth and Ekua have been receiving so much love and so many kudos and so much appreciation. So I just want to make sure that you know, and when this is online, the chat will be available as well. So you can go back if you'd like and read all those really incredibly positive comments. For those of you interested in person, the MFA is open, Garden for Boston is open, and you can come and see these and also see a really fabulous billboard that Ekua and Elizabeth collaborated on, the first in a series of 3. So with that, I'm going to say, again, many thanks, and we hope you all have such a great evening.
Thank you as well. It's been great having this conversation.
Thank you all.